The sound of jeering voices and splashing water filled the crisp evening air as Hazel Sinclair plunged deeper into the rushing river, her sodden skirts weighing her down like anchors in the unforgiving current. It was 1878 in Oklahoma Territory, and the promise of a new life was quickly drowning along with her hopes of escape. "Come back here, pretty thing. We ain't finished with you." The slurred voice of the largest man echoed across the water, his companions laughing as they stumbled along the riverbank, whiskey bottles glinting in the moonlight. They had cornered her outside the boarding house where she had taken a room just that morning, fresh off the eastbound train with dreams that now seemed foolish and distant. Hazel's lungs burned as she fought against the current, her long auburn hair plastered to her face and neck. At 22, she had traveled alone from Boston after her parents' passing, armed only with determination and the teaching credentials that were supposed to secure her position at Oklahoma City's new schoolhouse. Instead, she found herself fighting for her very life in the murky waters of the North Canadian River. "Let's go in after her, boys." One of the men started removing his boots, while the others hooted their approval. The terror that gripped her heart was absolute. Hazel was a strong swimmer, but the current was stronger, and the men, 5 of them, reeking of liquor and malice, were determined. She had fled the boarding house when they'd cornered her in the hallway, their intentions clear in their bloodshot eyes and wandering hands. A gunshot cracked through the night air like thunder, echoing against the water and silencing the drunken laughter instantly. "The ladies under my protection." The voice was deep and steady, carrying across the water with a calm authority that made even the rushing river seem to pause. "I suggest you gentlemen move along before I forget my manners." Hazel turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the dusky horizon, mounted on a dark horse at the river's edge. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his features, but the rifle in his hands gleamed clearly in the moonlight. He sat straight in the saddle, the picture of lethal composure. "Ain't no business of yours, stranger," the largest man called back, though he had stopped wading into the water. "I'm making it my business." The horseman cocked his rifle with a deliberate click. "And I rarely miss, even in this light." The drunken men exchanged glances, their bravado diminishing with each passing second. Finally, the ringleader spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth dying over," he muttered, and with a jerk of his head, he and his companion stumbled away, casting dark looks over their shoulders as they disappeared into the night. Hazel felt her strength failing as relief washed over her. The current tugged at her body, pulling her deeper into the river. She fought to keep her head above water, but her sodden clothes were like lead weights. "Madam, grab hold." The stranger had dismounted and was wading into the shallows, extending a long branch toward her. "I can't come in much further without getting swept away myself." With the last of her strength, Hazel lunged for the branch, her fingers closing around the rough bark. The man pulled steadily, his boots finding purchase in the riverbed as he dragged her toward the shore. When she was close enough, he reached out and grasped her arm, pulling her the rest of the way to safety. Hazel collapsed onto the bank, coughing up river water and shivering uncontrollably. Her rescuer quickly removed his long duster coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Thank you," she managed between chattering teeth, looking up at her savior for the first time. In the silvery moonlight, she could see a face weathered by sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, intense and clear, studying her with concern. "Zachary Hayes," he said simply. "Most folks call me Zach." "Hazel Sinclair," she replied, clutching his coat tighter around herself. "I'm indebted to you, Mr. Hayes." "No debt necessary, Miss Sinclair." He knelt beside her, his voice gentle but his gaze continually scanning their surroundings. "Those men from town," Hazel nodded. "I arrived this morning. They cornered me at my boarding house. I only meant to find work as the school teacher." Something hard flashed in Zach's eyes. "The Wilkins gang. They've been causing trouble since the railroad came through." He stood and offered his hand. "Can you stand, Miss Sinclair? We need to get you somewhere warm before you catch your death." Hazel accepted his hand, struggling to her feet on wobbly legs. Her dress clung to her, cold and heavy, making movement difficult. "My ranch isn't far," Zach said, then seemed to reconsider. "Though that might not be proper, I could take you to Mrs. Peterson's place. She's a widow who lives just outside town, respectable woman." "I don't think I can face town again tonight," Hazel admitted, her voice quavering not just from cold but from lingering fear. Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Mrs. Peterson it is, then. Can you ride?" Before she could answer, the sound of hooves and angry voices drifted from the direction of town. "Sounds like they've found more liquid courage and a few friends," Zach said grimly. He whistled sharply and his horse trotted over. "Change of plans. My ranch it is. We can send word to Mrs. Peterson in the morning." He helped Hazel onto the horse, then swung up behind her. The closeness of him, solid and warm against her back, was both improper and intensely comforting. She had never been this close to a man who wasn't family, but the circumstances left little room for conventional propriety. "Hold tight," he instructed, and with a gentle kick, they were off, galloping away from the river and the approaching danger. The Hayes Ranch lay nestled in a small valley about 5 miles outside Oklahoma City. By the time they arrived, Hazel was nearly unconscious from exhaustion and cold. Zach carried her from the horse to the modest cabin, kicking the door open and striding directly to the fireplace, where embers still glowed from his earlier fire. He laid her gently on a rough-hewn bench nearby and quickly built up the fire, casting anxious glances her way as the flames caught and grew. "Miss Sinclair, you need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, his voice matter-of-fact despite the impropriety of the suggestion. "I'll find you something dry to wear and turn my back. I promise on my honor I won't look, but you'll take ill if you stay in that soaked dress." Hazel nodded weakly, too cold to argue or feel embarrassed. Zach rummaged through a trunk and returned with a clean flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that would dwarf her. "Best I can offer," he said apologetically, placing them beside her. "I'll step outside while you change." "No," Hazel said, surprising herself with the force of her response. "They might have followed us. Just turn around. I'll be quick." Zach nodded and faced the wall, his shoulders rigid with evident discomfort at the situation. Hazel fumbled with the buttons of her dress, her fingers numb and clumsy, but eventually managed to peel off the sodden garment. She dried herself as best she could with a blanket Zach had provided, then pulled on his clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs several times. "I'm decent," she finally said, her voice small in the cabin's silence. Zach turned, relief evident on his face when he saw her standing there, drowning in his clothes but no longer shivering quite so violently. He busied himself hanging her wet dress near the fire to dry, then moved to the small kitchen area. "I'll make some coffee, strong and hot," he said. "Then you should try to sleep. You can take the bed. I'll use my bedroll by the fire." Hazel sank into a chair by the table, watching as her unlikely host moved around his cabin with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to solitude. "You live here alone, Mr. Hayes?" "Just me and the cattle," he confirmed, placing a kettle on the stove. "And the name's Zach, if you don't mind. Mr. Hayes makes me look for my father." "Then you must call me Hazel," she replied. a small smile finding its way to her lips despite the evening's trauma. "How long have you been in Oklahoma Territory?" "5 years now. Came west after the war with what was left of my family's money, bought this land cheap from a man eager to head to California." He measured coffee into a pot. "Built this place myself. It's not much, but it's mine." Hazel noticed for the first time that he favored his left leg slightly. "You were in the war," Zach nodded, his expression closing slightly. "Confederate cavalry. Took a Union bullet at Gettysburg. Lucky to have kept the leg, the doctors said." He glanced at her, a defensive edge to his voice. "If that changes your opinion of me, I understand." "My father was a Union doctor," Hazel said softly. "He always said that the men on both sides were just that, men, following orders, fighting for what they believed in." Something in Zach's posture eased at her words. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Hazel agreed, a pang of grief squeezing her heart. "He and my mother died last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry," Zach said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Is that why you came west?" Hazel nodded. "There was nothing left for me in Boston. I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher needed in Oklahoma City, and it seemed like Providence." The kettle whistled, and Zach poured the boiling water into the coffee pot. "The town's growing fast since the railroad came through. Decent folks mixed with the usual frontier riffraff." His jaw tightened. "Men like the ones who chased you tonight." "Do you think they'll come looking for us?" Hazel asked, the fear returning to her voice. "Doubt it. The Wilkins boys are cowards at heart. Once they sober up, they'll likely pretend it never happened." He poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, handing one to Hazel. "Still, I'll ride into town tomorrow and have a word with Sheriff Miller. He should know what happened." The coffee was strong and bitter, but the heat of it coursed through Hazel's body, chasing away the last of the chill. She cupped the mug in both hands, savoring the warmth. "What will you do now?" Zach asked. "About the teaching position, I mean." Hazel considered the question. Her first hours in Oklahoma City had been terrifying, but she wasn't one to give up easily. "I still need the job," she said with determination. "I've nowhere else to go, and teaching is all I know." Zach studied her over the rim of his mug, something like respect kindling in his eyes. "The schoolhouse is nearly finished. Town council's been looking for a teacher for months." "Then I'll present myself to them tomorrow," Hazel decided. "After I retrieve my belongings from the boarding house," she broke off, remembering the jeering faces of the men who had chased her. "If I can." "I'll go with you," Zach said simply. "Make sure you're not troubled again." Hazel was touched by his offer but hesitated. "I don't wish to impose further. You've already done so much. It's no imposition." Zach set down his mug. "Truth is, Miss Sinclair Hazel, this territory needs more good people. People willing to build something, not just take what they want and move on. Teachers especially." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Besides, I promised you my protection. I'm a man of my word." Something warm that had nothing to do with the coffee or fire bloomed in Hazel's chest. "Thank you, Zach, truly." He nodded, suddenly seeming a little self-conscious. "You should rest now. The bed's through there." He nodded toward a door at the back of the cabin. "I promise you'll be safe here tonight." Hazel believed him. Despite the impropriety of her situation alone in a stranger's cabin, wearing his clothes, she felt safer than she had since leaving Boston. "Good night, then," she said, rising from the table. "And thank you again for saving my life." "Good night, Hazel," Zach replied softly. "Sleep well." As she closed the bedroom door behind her, Hazel was struck by the strangeness of her circumstances. She had come west seeking a new beginning, and in the span of a single day had faced death and found an unexpected protector. She said a small prayer of thanks as she climbed into Zach's simple bed. inhaling the clean scent of the linens and feeling, for the first time since stepping off the train, that perhaps Oklahoma territory could indeed become her home. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, painting golden stripes across the plank floor. Hazel woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before the events of the previous night rushed back to her. She sat up, finding her dress now dry folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Someone had placed it there while she slept, though she had heard nothing. She dressed quickly, grateful to be back in her own clothes despite their wrinkled state. Her hair was a tangled mess, but she did her best to smooth it with her fingers before venturing out of the bedroom. The main room of the cabin was empty, the fire banked to glowing embers. A coffee pot sat warming on the stove, and beside it, a plate covered with a cloth. Hazel lifted the covering to find biscuits and some slices of dried beef. A note in a strong, slanting hand was propped against the plate. "Gone to check cattle. Back soon. Help yourself." Hazel was touched by the thoughtfulness. She poured herself coffee and ate gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. As she finished her simple breakfast, the cabin door opened, and Zach entered, bringing with him the scent of morning air and horses. "You're up," he said, removing his hat. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Hazel replied. "No ill effects from my river adventure, it seems." "Good." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I thought we might ride into town after I've had some coffee. The sooner you speak with the school board, the better." Hazel nodded her agreement. "I should also retrieve my trunk from the boarding house. Everything I own is in it. We'll do that first." Zach poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, studying her. In the clear light of day, Hazel could better see her rescuer. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. His eyes were a deep blue, set in a face tanned by long days under the sun. He was handsome in a rugged way, with an intensity about him that suggested he missed little. "What?" he asked, catching her appraisal. Hazel felt her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking that I never properly saw your face last night. It was too dark." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "And do I meet with your approval in the daylight, Miss Sinclair?" "You'll do," she replied with unexpected boldness, surprising a short laugh from him. "High praise indeed," he said, finishing his coffee. "We should head out if we want to reach town before midday." They rode double again, Hazel sitting behind Zach this time, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist. The impropriety of their arrangement wasn't lost on her, but circumstances had forced a certain practicality upon them. Oklahoma City was bustling when they arrived, the main street filled with wagons, riders, and pedestrians going about their business. Zach guided his horse directly to the sheriff's office, helping Hazel dismount before tying the reins to the hitching post. "Let me speak with Miller first," he said. "Then we'll get your trunk." The sheriff was a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes. He listened carefully as Zach recounted the events of the previous night, his expression darkening as the story unfolded. "The Wilkins boys again," he said when Zach finished. "They've been pushing the limits of my patience for months." He turned to Hazel. "I'm sorry for your experience, Miss Sinclair. That's not the welcome we want to give newcomers to our town." "I understand they don't represent the majority," Hazel replied diplomatically. Sheriff Miller nodded approvingly at her response. "I'll have a word with them. More than a word, in fact. This territory's trying to build itself into something respectable. Can't have men acting like that, especially toward a lady come to teach our children." "Then the teaching position is still open?" Hazel asked hopefully. "Far as I know, you'll want to speak with Mr. Thornton at the general store. He's head of the school board." The sheriff stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Though you might have some explaining to do about where you spent the night, news travels fast in a small town, and someone surely saw Hayes here riding off with you. Hazel felt her face flush. She hadn't considered how her absence from the boarding house might be interpreted. Miss Sinclair was in danger, Zach said firmly. I took her to my ranch for her safety and slept by the fire while she took the bed. There was nothing improper about it. I believe you, Hayes, the sheriff said, holding up a placating hand. But you know how people talk. Miss Sinclair's reputation is important if she's to be teaching the town's children. Perhaps Mrs. Peterson could help, Hazel suggested, remembering the woman Zach had mentioned the night before. If she would vouch for my character. Good thinking, Sheriff Miller agreed. Judith Peterson is respected by everyone in these parts. Her endorsement would go a long way. We'll stop by her place after we collect Miss Sinclair's belongings, Zach decided. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. As they left the office, Hazel felt a weight of worry settle on her shoulders. I hadn't considered how my situation might appear to others. Small towns run on gossip, Zach said grimly, but we'll set it right. Mrs. Peterson is a kind woman. Once she hears what happened, she'll help. The boarding house was a 2-story building on a side street, with a sign proclaiming rooms for respectable persons hanging above the door. A bell tinkled as they entered, and a thin woman with pinched features emerged from a back room. Miss Sinclair, she said coldly, recognition and disapproval evident in her tone. I was beginning to think you had skipped out without paying. Mrs. Becker, I apologize for my absence, Hazel began. There was an incident. I know exactly what kind of incident there was, the woman interrupted. You were seen riding off with a man after dark, hardly the behavior of a respectable schoolteacher. Zach stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling the small foyer. Madam, Miss Sinclair was chased into the river by drunk men who meant her harm. I intervened and took her to safety. Nothing improper occurred. Mrs. Becker's eyes widened slightly at Zach's authoritative tone, but her expression remained skeptical. Be that as it may, Mr. Hayes. Zachary Hayes, Mr. Hayes. This is an establishment for respectable women. I cannot have my other boarders exposed to questionable behavior. Hazel felt as if she'd been slapped. Mrs. Becker, I assure you, I'll need you to collect your things and find other accommodations, Miss Sinclair, the woman said firmly. Your room is upstairs, first door on the left. I'll expect payment for the night you stayed. Hazel stood frozen, mortification and indignation warring within her. Zach placed a steadying hand on her arm. We'll get your trunk, and I'll settle your bill, he said quietly. Don't give her the satisfaction of seeing you upset. Hazel nodded stiffly and followed Zach upstairs. Her trunk sat untouched at the foot of the narrow bed, and she was relieved to find nothing missing when she checked the contents. I can manage the payment myself, she said as Zach hefted the trunk. I'm not without funds. I know, he said simply, but let me do this, please. Something in his expression, a mixture of guilt and determination, made Hazel relent. They returned downstairs, where Zach paid Mrs. Becker, his manner coolly polite but his eyes hard as flint. The boarding house keeper seemed subdued by his presence, counting the coins without further comment. Outside, Zach secured Hazel's trunk to his horse with practiced efficiency. We'll stop at the general store next, he said. Best to speak with Mr. Thornton about the teaching position before visiting Mrs. Peterson. The general store was a large, well-stocked establishment that served as the commercial heart of Oklahoma City. Barrels of flour, sugar, and coffee lined one wall, while shelves of canned goods, tools, fabric, and sundries filled the rest of the space. A counter ran along the back, behind which stood a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Hayes," the man greeted them as they entered. "Don't usually see you in town twice in the same month. What brings you by?" "Mr. Thornton, this is Miss Hazel Sinclair," Zach said, placing a guiding hand at the small of Hazel's back. "She's come from Boston to inquire about the teaching position." Thornton's eyebrows rose with interest. "Is that so? Well, we've been waiting months for a qualified teacher." He studied Hazel appraisingly. "Do you have references, Miss Sinclair?" "Yes, sir." Hazel reached into her reticule and produced a letter from the headmistress of the girls' academy where she had previously taught. "I also have my teaching certificate." Thornton adjusted his spectacles and read the letter carefully. "Very impressive," he said finally. "Boston Ladies' Academy is well regarded, I believe." "It is, sir," Hazel confirmed. "I taught there for 3 years after completing my own education." "Well, the position pays $30 a month with lodging provided in the rooms above the schoolhouse," Thornton said. "Term would start in 2 weeks once the building is complete." "That sounds very agreeable," Hazel said, hope rising in her chest. Perhaps things would work out after all. Thornton hesitated, glancing between her and Zach. "There is, however, the matter of propriety. Small communities like ours place great importance on the moral character of those educating our young ones." Hazel's heart sank. News had obviously traveled fast. "Mr. Thornton, if you've heard rumors about my arrival in town, I can explain I vouched for Miss Sinclair with Sheriff Miller this morning," Zach interrupted, his voice level but with an underlying steel. "She was attacked by the Wilkins gang and nearly drowned trying to escape them. I offered her shelter for the night with all proper decorum observed." Thornton looked thoughtful. "The Wilkins boys, eh? They're a menace, no doubt about it." He studied Zach's face, seeming to weigh his words. "Your word carries weight with me, Hayes. You've always been straight in our dealings." "Mrs. Peterson has agreed to meet with Miss Sinclair as well," Zach added. "We're heading there next." That seemed to settle the matter for Thornton. "Judith Peterson's endorsement would satisfy the school board, I'm sure. Why don't you stop back here after you've spoken with her, Miss Sinclair? If all is in order, we can complete the paperwork today." Relief flooded through Hazel. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I appreciate your consideration." As they left the store, Hazel turned to Zach. "You said Mrs. Peterson agreed to meet with me. When did you arrange that?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I didn't, but she will. Mrs. Peterson and I have an understanding." "An understanding?" Hazel raised an eyebrow. "I keep her fences mended and her roof patched. She keeps me supplied with pies and good sense." Zach's smile widened slightly. "She was a friend to me when I first came to these parts. She'll help us." Mrs. Peterson's home was a neat, whitewashed cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a well-tended garden. Chickens pecked contentedly in the yard, scattering as Zach's horse approached. A woman in her 60s emerged onto the porch at the sound of their arrival, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tidy bun, and her face, though lined with age, held a youthful warmth. "Zachary Hayes," she called out. "Twice in 1 month I see your face. The world must be ending." Zach dismounted and helped Hazel down. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Hazel Sinclair. She's come from Boston to take the teaching position." Mrs. Peterson's shrewd eyes took in Hazel's travel-worn appearance and Zach's protective stance beside her. "Something tells me there's a story here. Come inside, both of you. I've just taken a peach cobbler from the oven." The interior of the cottage was as neat as its exterior, filled with simple but well-made furniture and the delicious aroma of baked goods. Mrs. Peterson ushered them to a table and served generous portions of cobbler before sitting down across from them. "Now," she said, folding her hands, Tell me everything and don't leave out a single detail." Between bites of the delicious cobbler, Hazel recounted her journey from Boston, her arrival in Oklahoma City, and the terrifying encounter with the Wilkins gang. Zach occasionally interjected with details from his perspective, explaining how he had happened to be riding near the river and heard her cries for help. Mrs. Peterson listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to outrage to sympathy as the tale unfolded. When they finished, she reached across the table and patted Hazel's hand. "My dear, what a frightful welcome to our town. Those Wilkins boys need a good thrashing, and that's the truth. The situation has created some difficulties regarding my reputation," Hazel explained hesitantly. "Mrs. Becker at the boarding house has asked me to leave, and Mr. Thornton at the general store seemed concerned about my suitability as a teacher." "Amelia Becker has always been too quick to judge," Mrs. Peterson said dismissively. "And as for George Thornton, he's a good man but mindful of appearances." She studied Hazel thoughtfully. "You say the school would provide lodging," Hazel nodded. "Above the schoolhouse, apparently, but it won't be ready for 2 weeks." "Then the matter is simple," Mrs. Peterson declared. "You'll stay here with me until the schoolhouse is complete. My endorsement will satisfy the town gossips, and you'll have a proper chaperone." She turned to Zach. "And you, young man, can stop looking so worried. I'll make sure Miss Sinclair's reputation remains intact." Relief washed over Hazel. "Mrs. Peterson, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed, child. I was a newcomer to this territory myself once, many years ago." A shadow of old grief passed across the older woman's face. "My late husband and I came west after the war. I know what it's like to start fresh in a strange place." "I'll bring Miss Sinclair's trunk from my horse," Zach said, standing. When he had gone outside, Mrs. Peterson leaned closer to Hazel. "He's a good man, that one. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a more honorable soul in the territory." "He saved my life," Hazel said simply. "I'll always be grateful to him for that." Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Gratitude is a fine beginning, my dear. But I suspect there might be more than gratitude in those pretty eyes of yours when you look at him." Hazel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hardly know him, Mrs. Peterson." "Sometimes knowing comes quick, sometimes slow," the older woman said cryptically, "but it always comes if you're open to it." She patted Hazel's hand again. "Now let's get you settled. You look dead on your feet, poor thing." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Mrs. Peterson's endorsement smoothed over any concerns about Hazel's character, and Mr. Thornton officially hired her as Oklahoma City's schoolteacher. The Wilkins gang kept their distance, chastened by a stern warning from Sheriff Miller and, Hazel suspected, by the knowledge that Zachary Hayes had taken an interest in her welfare. Zach himself became a regular visitor to Mrs. Peterson's cottage, stopping by every few days with fresh game or produce from his garden. Each visit, he stayed a little longer, drawn into conversation with Hazel as they sat on the porch under Mrs. Peterson's benevolently watchful eye. Hazel learned that Zach had come from Georgia originally, the second son of a plantation owner who had lost everything in the war. His older brother had died at Antietam, his father from a heart seizure upon learning of the loss. His mother had followed not long after, leaving Zach alone to make his way in a shattered world. "I drifted west because there was nothing left for me in Georgia," he explained one evening as they shelled peas together. "Worked cattle drives in Texas, saved every penny until I could buy my own place." "You've built something to be proud of," Hazel said softly, admiring the quiet strength in his hands as they worked. "It's modest compared to what I grew up with," Zach replied, "but it's mine, free and clear." No one can take it from me." In turn, Hazel shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her parents' dedication to medicine and education, and her own journey to becoming a teacher. "They wanted me to marry well," she admitted. "A doctor's daughter had prospects in Boston. But I wanted to teach, to make a difference in children's lives the way my own teachers had for me." "And now you're here, about to do exactly that," Zach observed, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Life takes unexpected turns," Hazel said, glancing up to find his blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mrs. Peterson, dozing nearby in her rocking chair, gave a delicate snore that broke the moment, but the warmth of it lingered in Hazel's heart long after Zach had said his goodbyes and ridden back to his ranch. On the Sunday before school was to begin, Zach arrived at the cottage with his wagon rather than his horse. "The schoolhouse is ready," he announced. "I thought you might like to see it before the children arrive tomorrow." Hazel eagerly accepted, and after Mrs. Peterson insisted on packing them a picnic lunch. "Young people need sustenance for adventures," she declared. They set off toward the newly completed building on the edge of town. The schoolhouse was a simple but sturdy structure, built of local timber with a small bell tower crowning its peaked roof. Large windows allowed ample light into the main room, where rows of desks faced a teacher's platform. A pot-bellied stove stood ready for the coming winter, and a blackboard covered one wall. "It's perfect," Hazel breathed, running her hand along one of the desks. "Absolutely perfect." Zach watched her explore the room, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Want to see your living quarters?" A narrow staircase at the back of the classroom led to a surprisingly spacious apartment above. There was a sitting room with bookshelves, a small kitchen area, a bedroom, and even a tiny washroom. The town council was determined to provide proper accommodations, Zach explained. "They want their teacher to stay." Hazel turned slowly, taking it all in. "I can scarcely believe it. In Boston, I shared lodgings with 3 other teachers in a cramped apartment." "Do you miss the city?" Zach asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. Hazel considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, museums, libraries, concerts. But there's a freedom here I never knew in Boston, a sense that one can truly build something new." "That's what drew me to this territory," Zach said. "The chance to create something that's entirely my own, shaped by my own hands." They shared the picnic lunch on a blanket under a cottonwood tree beside the schoolhouse, talking easily about their hopes for the future. Zach spoke of expanding his herd, perhaps building a larger house someday. Hazel described her plans for the school, the subjects she hoped to teach beyond basic reading and arithmetic. As the afternoon waned, Zach grew quieter, a thoughtful expression settling on his features. "What is it?" Hazel asked finally. "You seem troubled." "Not troubled," he said slowly. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change. A month ago I was content with my solitary existence. I had my land, my cattle, my routine. And now," Hazel prompted when he fell silent again. Zach met her eyes directly. "Now I find myself riding into town more often than I have in 5 years, looking for reasons to stop by Mrs. Peterson's cottage, thinking about a woman with auburn hair and more courage than most men I've known." Hazel's heart quickened at his words. "Zach, I know it's fast," he continued. "Too fast, perhaps. You've barely settled here. But I find myself wondering if you might consider allowing me to call on you properly. No river rescues or drunk men required." A smile bloomed on Hazel's face, warmth spreading through her chest. "I would like that very much." Relief and something deeper lit Zach's eyes. "Good. That's good." The first day of school dawned clear and bright. Hazel stood nervously at the door of the schoolhouse, greeting each child and parent as they arrived. 23 students in all, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, filed into the classroom, their expressions varying from excitement to trepidation to outright suspicion. As Hazel began her first lesson, she spotted a familiar figure through the window. Zach sat mounted on his horse at the edge of the schoolyard, watching. When he saw her notice him, he touched the brim of his hat in a small salute, then turned and rode away, leaving Hazel with a smile she couldn't quite suppress as she turned back to her pupils. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Hazel taught during the days, finding deep satisfaction in the progress of her students. Zach called on her 2 evenings each week and on Sundays after church, their relationship developing with a sweetness that surprised them both. They rode together across the prairie, explored the small town, and spent quiet evenings on the porch of her quarters above the schoolhouse, talking until the stars emerged. One Sunday in late October, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Oklahoma Territory, Zach arrived with his wagon rather than his horse. "I thought we might have a picnic by the river," he suggested, "at a calmer spot than where we first met." The day was unusually warm for autumn, the sky a clear, endless blue. They followed a winding trail that led away from town, eventually reaching a peaceful bend in the river where cottonwoods and willows created a natural bower. "It's beautiful here," Hazel said as Zach spread a blanket on the grass. "So different from that night." "I ride here often," Zach admitted, unpacking a basket Mrs. Peterson had prepared for them. "It's peaceful, good for thinking." They ate Mrs. Peterson's fried chicken and biscuits, talking easily about the week's events, the progress of Hazel's students, the new calf born on Zach's ranch, the gossip from town. As they finished the meal, Zach grew quieter, a now familiar sign that he was gathering his thoughts. "Hazel," he said finally, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. A smile flickered across his face before his expression turned serious again. "When I was in the war, I saw men die all around me. I made a promise to myself that if I survived, I would build a life that meant something. For a long time, I thought that meant my ranch, my land, being beholden to no one." He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "But these past weeks have shown me that a life means more when it's shared. When I rode up to find you in that river, fighting for your life, I had no idea that you would end up fighting for mine in a different way." Hazel's breath caught in her throat as Zach reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "I've carried it with me since I left Georgia, never thinking I would have cause to use it. But now—" He met her eyes, vulnerability and hope mingled in his gaze. "Hazel Sinclair, I know it hasn't been long, but I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Hazel's eyes as a joy unlike anything she had ever known bloomed within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zach, I will." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender kiss there first. When they parted, Hazel saw her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "I love you," she said, the words feeling as natural as breathing. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment you fired that shot and declared I was under your protection." "Best shot I ever fired," Zach murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. They were married in the town's small church 2 weeks later with Mrs. Peterson beaming proudly from the front pew and the entire community in attendance. Even Sheriff Miller made an appearance, his usual stern demeanor softened by the occasion. After the ceremony, they rode to Zach's ranch, their ranch now, with cheers and well wishes following them out of town. Zach had spent the intervening weeks making improvements to the cabin, adding a second room and new furniture, determined that Hazel should have a proper home. "It's still modest," he said apologetically as he carried her across the threshold. "Not what you were used to in Boston." "It's perfect," Hazel assured him, taking in the simple but comfortable space with its gleaming floors and new curtains at the windows. "Because it's ours." Later, as twilight settled over the land, they stood together on the porch, Zach's arms wrapped around Hazel from behind as they gazed at the purpling horizon. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming west, all that happened that night at the river." Hazel turned in his embrace, raising a hand to touch his cheek. "Not for a moment. That night changed everything for us. I rode to town that evening on a whim," Zach confessed. "Had a feeling I should check on a new calf. Took the river path instead of the main road, if I hadn't." "But you did," Hazel said simply. "And here we are." As spring transformed the prairie into a sea of wildflowers, Hazel continued teaching, riding to town each morning and returning to the ranch each afternoon. The school board had been surprisingly supportive of her marriage, recognizing that Mrs. Hayes was still as capable an educator as Miss Sinclair had been. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Zach's cattle herd grew, and Hazel started a kitchen garden that soon became the envy of neighboring farms. They worked side by side during the daylight hours and held each other close at night, their love deepening with each passing day. In late August, nearly a year after their first meeting, Hazel received a letter from the school board requesting a meeting. She arrived at the general store with some trepidation, unsure what to expect. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Thornton greeted her warmly. "Thank you for coming. The board has been discussing the future of education in our growing community." Hazel nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The town has voted to build a larger school next year," Thornton explained. "With the railroad bringing more families, we'll need at least 2 teachers. We'd like to offer you the position of headmistress, overseeing both classrooms." Surprise and pleasure filled Hazel. "That's a tremendous honor, Mr. Thornton. I would be delighted to accept." "Excellent," Thornton beamed. "Construction will begin in the spring. In the meantime—" He hesitated slightly. "We understand that you might have personal considerations to factor into your planning." Hazel raised an eyebrow, unsure of his meaning. Thornton coughed delicately. "Mrs. Peterson may have mentioned that congratulations might soon be in order for you and Mr. Hayes." Heat flooded Hazel's cheeks. She had confided in Mrs. Peterson just last week about her suspicion that she might be expecting a child, but hadn't even told Zach yet, waiting until she was certain. "News does travel quickly in a small town," she said with a rueful smile. "Indeed it does," Thornton agreed. "The board wants to assure you that your position will be held for you should you need time away for family matters." "Thank you," Hazel said, genuinely touched by the consideration. "That means a great deal to me." That evening, as she and Zach sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained since their wedding day, Hazel decided it was time to share her news. "I had an interesting meeting with the school board today," she began. "They've offered me the position of headmistress for an expanded school next year." "That's wonderful," Zach said, squeezing her hand. "Though I'm not surprised. You've transformed that schoolhouse. The children adore you." "There's more," Hazel continued, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "They also assured me that my position would be held for me when I need time away for family matters." Zach looked puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Hazel, are you saying—" She nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Zach." "In early spring." With a whoop of pure joy, Zach swept her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch until they were both laughing and breathless. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Hazel asked softly, though his reaction had left little doubt. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zach assured her, drawing her close. "When I rode along that river last year, I was a solitary man with modest dreams. Now I have a wife I adore, a child on the way, and hope for a future brighter than anything I could have imagined." "All because some drunk men chased me into a river," Hazel said with a small laugh. "Remind me to send them a thank you note," Zach murmured against her hair. "Right after I thank my lucky stars that I happened to be riding by at exactly the right moment." "I don't believe it was luck," Hazel said thoughtfully. "My father always said that some things were meant to be, that lives could be connected by invisible threads of destiny." "Your father was a wise man," Zach said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I'm grateful every day for whatever thread led me to you." Their son, William James Hayes, was born on a clear April morning in 1880 with Mrs. Peterson serving as midwife and Zach pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed to enter, he approached the bed with reverence, gazing down at his wife and newborn son with wonder. "He has your eyes," Hazel said tiredly, a smile of pure contentment on her face. "And hopefully your steady disposition." "And your courage," Zach added, gently touching the downy head nestled against Hazel's breast. "Welcome to the world, William Hayes." As promised, the school board held Hazel's position, engaging a temporary teacher until she was ready to return in the fall. The new, larger schoolhouse was completed over the summer, a proud symbol of Oklahoma City's growth and prosperity. By the time William called Will by his adoring parents was 3, the Hayes Ranch had nearly doubled in size, with a new, more spacious house built adjacent to the original cabin. Hazel divided her time between her family and the school, finding fulfillment in both roles. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching Will chase fireflies across the yard, Zach turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "You know what day it is?" he asked. Hazel considered for a moment, then smiled with recognition. "5 years since the river, since you fired that shot and said I was under your protection." Zach nodded, taking her hand. "5 years since my life truly began." He gazed out at their son, now squealing with delight as he captured a glowing insect in his cupped hands. "Sometimes I look at him, at you, at all we've built together, and I can scarcely believe it's real." "Oh, it's real," Hazel assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "As real as that river water was cold, as real as your voice was when you claimed me as your responsibility." "Best claim I ever staked," Zach said, his voice husky with emotion. "Better than any gold mine or cattle herd." "And have I proved a worthwhile investment?" Hazel teased gently. "Beyond measure," he assured her, drawing her close for a kiss that, even after 5 years, still made her heart race. "Far beyond measure." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Will ran back to them, his hands still cupped around his prize. "Look, Mama, Papa, I caught one." Together, they bent to admire their son's capture, the tiny light illuminating his eager face in the gathering dusk. In that moment, Hazel felt the fullness of her life with an almost painful intensity, the love she shared with Zach, the miracle of their child, the community they had helped to build, the future stretching before them full of promise. From terror in a rushing river to this peaceful evening surrounded by love, it was a journey she could never have imagined that day. She stepped off the train in Oklahoma City. But as Zach's arm tightened around her waist and Will's laughter rang out in the twilight air, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 years later, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady blue gaze. Will, now 6 and attending the school where his mother served as headmistress, took his role as big brother very seriously, proudly showing Libby his favorite spots on the ranch and telling her stories about the river where their parents had first met. By 1890, Oklahoma Territory was preparing for statehood, and the Hayes family had become pillars of the community. Zach served on the town council, his quiet wisdom and fair-mindedness earning him the respect of newcomers and old-timers alike. Hazel's school had grown to 4 classrooms with as many teachers, all under her capable direction. One crisp autumn day, 12 years after their fateful meeting, Zach suggested they take the children for a picnic by the river, the same spot where he had proposed to Hazel. Will, now 9, raced ahead with the endless energy of youth, while 6-year-old Libby rode proudly in front of her father on his horse. They spread their blanket under the same cottonwood tree, now significantly larger than it had been on that day long ago. As the children played nearby, carefully supervised but given freedom to explore, Zach took Hazel's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful, "about our story, about how we met." "The river rescue," Hazel smiled. "Will asks me to tell it at least once a week." "I think he imagines it much more dramatically than it actually was." "It was plenty dramatic," Zach countered with a smile. "Beautiful woman in distress, drunken villains, heroic cowboy with a rifle." "When you put it that way, it does sound like something from a dime novel," Hazel laughed. Zach's expression grew more serious. "I've been thinking that our children should know the full story someday, not just the excitement of that night, but everything that came after, how we built this life together step by step." "They will," Hazel assured him, "when they're older. I want them to understand that love isn't always thunderbolts and dramatic rescues," Zach continued. "That most of it is in the quiet moments, making coffee together in the morning, teaching Will to read, rocking Libby to sleep when she has nightmares. The daily claiming," Hazel said softly. "The daily choosing to protect and cherish." Zach's eyes, still as blue and intense as they had been that night by the river, held hers with unwavering love. "Exactly that. I fired one shot that night, but I've been choosing you every day since." "And I've been choosing you," Hazel replied, leaning forward to kiss him softly. A chorus of "you-wa" from their children broke the moment, and they turned to find Will and Libby watching them with matching expressions of childish disgust. "Mama and Papa are being mushy again," Will announced with the long-suffering air of a child accustomed to such displays. "I like mushy," Libby declared loyally, though her nose wrinkled in contradiction to her words. Zach laughed and reached out to sweep his daughter into his arms. "One day, Miss Libby Hayes, some young man will come along and try to be mushy with you, and I'll have to get my rifle out again." "Zachary," Hazel scolded, though her eyes danced with amusement, "don't put such ideas in her head." "What ideas?" Will asked, suddenly interested. "Is Papa going to shoot someone?" "No one is shooting anyone," Hazel said firmly. "Your father is making a very poor joke about something that won't happen for a very, very long time." "If ever," Zach added with mock severity, causing Libby to giggle as he tickled her ribs. As the afternoon waned into evening, they packed up their picnic and headed back toward the ranch, Libby nodding sleepily against her father's chest as they rode. The setting sun painted the prairie in gold, the tall grasses swaying in the gentle breeze like waves on an amber sea. "It's still beautiful," Hazel said quietly, gazing out at the land that had become her home. Even after all these years. Just like its mistress, Zach replied, his voice warm with affection, even more beautiful with time. Back at the ranch, they settled the children into bed, listened to prayers, and told stories until young eyelids grew heavy. When the house was quiet, they retreated to the porch as they had done nearly every evening of their married life. The stars emerged overhead, countless points of light in the vast Oklahoma sky. Zach wrapped a blanket around Hazel's shoulders as the night air cooled, then settled beside her on the porch swing. 12 years, he mused, his arm around her waist. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes like we've always been together. Both are true in their way, Hazel replied thoughtfully. Time is strange like that. They sat in comfortable silence, the creak of the swing and the distant lowing of cattle the only sounds breaking the quiet of the night. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been?" Zach asked finally. "If I hadn't ridden by the river that night. If you had taken another route fleeing those men." Hazel considered the question seriously. "I used to in the early days, but not anymore. What we've built together feels so right, so meant to be, that I can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," Zach agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I still thank Providence regularly for putting me in the right place at the right time. And I thank Providence for giving me the courage to run into that river rather than surrender to those men," Hazel added. "I was terrified, but something in me refused to give up without a fight." "That's my Hazel," Zach said proudly. "Always had more courage than sense." She elbowed him gently in the ribs. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Hayes. I have an abundance of both." "That you do, Mrs. Hayes," he conceded with a laugh. "That you do." As the evening deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking softly of their children's futures, the coming winter, plans for expanding the ranch's operations in the spring. Ordinary conversations between a husband and wife, unremarkable in their content but precious in their normalcy. When at last they rose to go inside, Zach paused at the door, looking back at the starlit prairie stretching away from their home. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I claimed you were under my protection that night, I had no idea how completely our lives would entwine. How much joy and purpose you would bring to my existence." Hazel reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar contours that had aged but only grown dearer with the passing years. "And I had no idea that being under your protection would mean finding a home for my heart. But I'm grateful every day that it did." Zach turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "As am I, my love, as am I." Hand in hand, they stepped inside, closing the door on the vast Oklahoma night, two lives joined by a moment of courage and compassion beside a rushing river. Their story still unfolding with each passing day, their love as steady and enduring as the land they called home.